anguilla. It can appear wherever there's a weak government, wherever you have a government so weak that it's willing to essentially strangle its own population to help the rich, engage in a kind of neo-feudalism. That's where the money will go. And ultimately, the money will be wiped out, just as it was wiped out in Europe when Europe used the money to lend to the post-Soviet economies. Remember what happened to the Roman Empire when it collapsed. Ultimately, all the gold of Rome flowed out to India, which was known as the sink of gold, and the silver went to China and East Asia. The money economy was drained, and it snapped back into a kind of self-sufficiency on the land. That's what the neoliberal economic model ends up with, and you're seeing that in Latvia and Poland as dress rehearsals for the rest of the world, in the sense that now more and more of the population is moving back to the land. Well, the irony is that the Russians and the Central Europeans and even the Germans, many families have always had dachas, or local houses on the land where they grow their own food, they go there on weekends, their country houses. You're going to have a deurbanization of Europe and of many other countries, and to move back to the land of self-sufficiency. In Europe now they're talking about digging deep wells for cooling and for warming water. They're working on solar energy. Essentially, you're having a retrogression towards a medieval subsistence-type economy throughout most of the Western world. That, again, is the neoliberal model. Once you strip all of the capital away, once you strip the money away, once you impose debt peonage on an economy, you're left with a feudal-type subsistence economy. That's our future, as current trends are going, until voters push back in another direction.
Like the Roman Empire, are we being led down toward a new dark age? You have said that that's what tends to happen when oligarchies do the planning, and this sounds just like what you've been describing.
That's the logical result. If you have an exponential growth in debt and debt service, stripping money away from the real economy, then you're not going to have more tangible investment. You're not going to have infrastructure. You're not going to have rising productivity leading to rising living standards. You're going to have the economic surplus siphoned off by essentially the financial, insurance, and real estate sector, and that's going to impoverish the real economy, just the opposite of the kind of free market that Adam Smith, Mill, and even the socialists in the progressive era in the United States sought to bring about.
What is the difference between the Depression of the 1930s and how debt was dealt with then and how bad debt is being dealt with today?
Well, first of all, debt ratios are much higher today than they were back in the 30s. And in the 30s, the debt ratio is about 30% of national income, yearly income, and today it's about 130%. So in the 1930s, the Great Depression actually hit the United States much harder than any other country because Americans used checking accounts much more than other countries. The banking system was much more pyramided then than in Europe. Well, for the same reason, today's debt crisis is hitting America the hardest because America is the most highly leveraged economy today, much more leveraged than we were in the Depression, so the debt squeeze is much more intense now than it'll be in the Depression. The great achievement of Alan Greenspan and neoliberals and Bush, and above all Clinton, by abolishing the Glass-Steagall Act, was to make the current Depression much worse than the 1930s, and the victory of the Obama administration threatens to be to impose much harsher terms on labor than ever was imposed in the 1930s, because in the 1930s you had an active unionization, you had an active alternative to neoliberals, and today the neoliberals realize that in order to have their kind of free market, a market where they're free for predators to take everything for themselves, leaving nothing for labor, the neoliberals have managed to crowd out of the economics curriculum any alternative doctrine but the right-wing monetarism of the Chicago School of the sort that was promoted in Chile. By the way, as we've talked on Monday, March 3rd, you have the Dow Jones now losing more than 300 points today, down more than 300 points. So as we talk, the economy is shrinking. There go people's retirement funds. There go the pension funds. There goes General Motors and General Electric because companies throughout the United States cannot properly fund their pension programs. There goes corporate America. The whole stack of cards is being wound down, and it seems that only the financial planners anticipate this. They're grabbing what they can now. They're taking the $11 trillion in bailout and giving it to themselves. Their idea is to empty the cupboard so there will be nothing left for anybody else after another year or two. They will have got their money and taken it and ran. That's the current Treasury plan.
Speaking of the stock market, how do you view stock market volatility in 2009? More of the same?
It looks like it's continuing to go down. Every single month since last August, the Dow Jones has closed at a lower and lower level. And given the debt deflation and given the feedback between higher debt and corporate insolvency, you're having more and more companies being pushed beneath the break-even point. And as they're pushed down, the government is giving more and more money away to the creditors without any money at all for the debtors. For instance, in Florida now, there are something like, in one city, there are 300 bankruptcies per day in one judge's courtroom. The average foreclosure takes 30 seconds. So at the same time you're bailing out the creditors, you're foreclosing more and more on property. Chip Case, who does the Case Schiller Real Estate Index, says that now when the foreclosures occur, the trucks back up to the houses that night, strip away the piping, strip away the copper wiring, the houses are stripped in a night. And you're having that kind of physical asset stripping of real estate spreading from Florida and essentially the sand states, Nevada, Arizona, Florida. The real estate and the housing stock of the country is being stripped away, and this is the result of the bankruptcy law passed by the financial sector and the credit card companies a few years ago.
So, Dr. Hudson, as we slip back into some sort of form of neo-feudalism, which area of the world do you think is going to weather it better, the United States or, let's say, Europe? Do you have an opinion on that?
The U.S. and Europe are both following the neoliberal death trap. The part of the world that can succeed best is the part of the world that can keep freest of war, because the main threat now to the economy is a military threat. It's always been the case under feudalism. The feudal epoch was one of warlords robbing each other. Certainly in the Asian countries, their political discussions is how do we keep free of war? And the main way that they can see of keeping free of war is to stop the expansion of American military bases throughout the world. The military bases now have come to exceed 850 bases. So essentially you have Eurasia saying to the United States, we're having a Monroe Doctrine of our own. Stay out of our continent, close your military bases, and get out. America's response is, if you don't do what we say, we'll bomb you. So America is suddenly being perceived as Asia as the great threat to their own economies by trying to force them to militarize at the same rate that America is militarizing the economy. And the way that Asia is trying to stop this militarization is to prevent dollar hegemony from taking place. They're trying to enter into barter deals now to avoid the use of the dollar in any way. They're trying to insulate themselves from the dollar and the euro collapse. And their attempts to do that is considered an act of war in the United States. So essentially, the U.S. foreign policy is, if you don't give us a free ride, if you don't accept our dollars in exchange for your goods and services and industry, we're going to have more military bases and surround you. And the dollars you use are to be lent back to the U.S. Treasury in order to run a deficit that is largely military in nature. So you are to fund our military encirclement of your economies that is supposed to put a squeeze on you to prevent your essentially industrializing and economic survival. That is the main source of political and economic tension in the world today.
And I understand that you see the dollar remaining the global currency. And presently, there's no other currency that could replace the dollar, right?
No, there isn't. And the idea, therefore, is for governments to avoid any other national currency. They're making barter deals. I just got back last month from Malaysia, meeting with Prime Minister Mahathir. And the attempt of Malaysia to avoid a currency crisis such as it managed to avoid in 1997 is to avoid foreign currency deals altogether, to avoid the money system. And we're seeing today what I'd seen back in the 1950s and 1960s between the United States and Russia, long-term barter deals. The final stage of finance capitalism is a reversion to barter. Just as the world economy in the second millennium and first millennium BC emerged as a credit economy, then turning into a money economy, ending in a barter economy, that's what you're having today.
Dr. Michael Hudson, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure being on. I think we posed more questions than we could answer today.
Something happening here. Yeah. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there.
I've been speaking with Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show has been The Way We Were and What We Are Becoming. Dr. Hudson is a financial economist and historian. He is president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trend, a Wall Street financial analyst, and distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His 1972 book, Super-Imperialism, The Economic Strategy of American Empire, is a critique of how the United States exploited foreign economies through the IMF and World Bank. He is also author of The Myth of Aid and Global Fracture, The New International Economic Order. Dr. Hudson has written several recent articles on the global financial crisis, including Orwellian Doublethink, Nationalize the Banks, The Language of Deception, Finance Capitalism Hits a Wall, The Oligarch's Escape Plan at the Treasury's Expense, and Bubble Economy 2.0, The Financial Recovery Plan from Hell. Recovery for whom? The answer, for the people who designed the program and their constituency. Dr. Hudson has been a consultant to foreign governments, including Canada, Mexico, and Russia. Visit his website at www.michael-hudson.com.